Welcome to Fairfax County Public Schools WIDA Access for ELS annual training. Why do we administer the WIDA Access? Under the Every Student Succeeds Act, divisions must annually assess the English proficiency of all English learners in grades K through 12 using a state-approved assessment. The state-approved assessment in Virginia is the WIDA Access for ELS. How are WIDA Access results used? Students and families use it to understand students' current level of English language proficiency. Districts use it to evaluate language support programs, monitor student progress, and determine if a student is eligible to exit an English language support program. It also informs instruction for ELS, provides students with English language proficiency level for the following school year, provides students with a current overall WIDA composite score and EL accommodations and exemptions, as well as measure progress towards proficiency in English. The assessment has been built upon the WIDA English Language Development Standards, which correspond with college and career readiness standards, including Common Core State Standards, Next Generation Science Standards, and other state content standards. Access for ELS measures students' academic English language proficiency in 5 areas. The first is social and instructional language. This standards incorporate proficiencies students need to engage with the general language of the classroom and the school. The other standards are the language of the language arts, the language of mathematics, the language of science, and the language of social studies. Access for ELS tests academic language within 4 domains: listening, reading, writing, and speaking. The listening test and the reading test use multiple choice questions to assess a student's ability to process, understand, interpret, and evaluate language. The writing test and speaking test consist of open-ended tasks engaging the student in written and oral communication. The writing and speaking test allow students to demonstrate the language they can produce in English. Access for ELS Online is administered by grade level or grade level clusters. Grade 1 is a separate test cluster. It provides a developmentally appropriate testing experience for students. Other grades are clustered as follows: grades 2 and 3, grades 4 and 5, grades 6 through 8, and grades 9 through 12. The test platform captures and scores student responses for the listening and reading domains. The speaking and writing tests are scored centrally at DRC by trained raters. Training is task-specific in order to ensure that raters understand the nuances of each unique writing or speaking task. Raters are instructed to not score for accent and regionalisms, but to take into account the fluency and clarity of speech of students' responses in regards to the speaking test. They also do not score for mechanics, punctuations, and spelling and writing. The keyboard responses are sent automatically to DRC to be scored, and handwritten responses need to be mailed to DRC. For the speaking test, students speak into a headset to record their answers. You will use 2 websites while preparing for and administering Access for ELS. While both websites have WIDA in their names, their purposes and functionalities are quite different. The WIDA Secure Portal is primarily used by test coordinators and test examiners to learn about test content and train for their respective roles. Who takes the WIDA Access? Only students with an English language proficiency or ELP level will be taking WIDA Access. Level 9 is typically for kindergarten English learners. Level 1 is entering, Level 2 beginning, Level 3 developing, Level 4 expanding. If by chance you still have a Level 5 student, that typically means the student did not test last year but should be assessed this year.
Students with an ELP level 9 or 1 through 5 are the only students who are assessed with the annual ELP assessment. Students with a 6A through 6D or a level 10 are not assessed with WIDA Access. Also, those new students who are enrolled who have a language other than or in addition to English as a home language are first screened with the WIDA Screener or the Kindergarten WIDA Screener before administering the annual ELP assessment.
How to do a quick find in SIS. First, you'll put an asterisk in the grade, ELP level, and ESOL status fields. Then you'll click the Find button. You can export results into Excel, then filter out any student who has a blank 6A, 6B, 6C, 6D, 10, or PL in the ELP level field. The remaining students should be assessed with WIDA. Another option is using ELF, the same database that you use for the WIDA screener. When looking in SIS, you'll want to look at the ELP level and not the ESOL status. Even students who refuse ESOL services are still required to be assessed. How to determine the appropriate assessment? There are 6 different assessments that can be administered at the elementary level. The Virginia L checklist for kindergarten students with significant cognitive disabilities, Kindergarten WIDA Access for Ls, Virginia checklist for students in grades K through 12 with hearing and/or visual impairments, WIDA Alternate Access, WIDA Access Paper, as well as WIDA Access Online. The options for the annual ELP assessment for grades K include 3 different assessments. First, the Virginia checklist for students in grades K through 12 with hearing and visual impairments. The criteria must be met by the student. Either the student has severely limited vision or blindness, or is deaf or hard of hearing. For students who are blind or have limited vision, evidence must be collected for the listening and speaking domains only. For those students who are deaf or hard of hearing, evidence must be collected for reading and writing. For students who have significant cognitive disabilities, the kindergarten checklist will be used. The student must meet all 3 criteria. The student is an English learner, the student has a significant cognitive disability and is eligible for special education services under IDEA, and the student is an alternative curriculum aligned with their state's academic standards. Most kindergarten students will take the WIDA Access for Ls. These are kindergarten students with an ELP level 9 or who have been retained that have an ELP level 1 through 4. For the Kindergarten WIDA Access for Ls administration, a student is assessed during one sitting with an optional break. Average testing time is approximately 45 minutes. Knowing that scheduling may be difficult this year, it is best to try to assess the student in one session. If the student must be assessed in 2 sessions, you want to have them as close together as possible. The Kindergarten WIDA Access tests are scored by the test examiner. Both the test examiner and STC should double-check the following in all kindergarten test booklets before WIDA booklets are turned in April. Circles, ovals, or squares should be filled in completely. Please, no check marks. Squares for started here and stopped here should be filled in where appropriate. Any items that need to be scored by the test examiner, such as correct or incorrect or a score on a writing rubric, need to be bubbled in. Required training for the kindergarten assessment is in MyPDE under WIDA Access for Ls Annual Training Curriculum Kindergarten. In addition to the training, the examiner must also pass the kindergarten quiz on the WIDA Consortium page. For students with severely limited vision or blindness, you'll want to check the level of impairment. You can use Access Online tests for students who need large computer monitor or a zoom-in tool embedded in the test. You'll want to practice this with the student in advance. You can also use the Access Paper test for students who need large print or the use of a magnifier. You can also use an LCD projector with a document camera. If the level of impairment is too significant for students to participate in WIDA Access for Ls, you will then use the checklist. In the checklist, you will only collect evidence for listening and speaking. For students who are deaf or hard of hearing, again you'll want to check the level of the impairment. Allowable accommodations can be used on the Access assessment. Translation of test items into American Sign Language is prohibited. Translation of test directions is allowed though. The school needs to determine if the student can access WIDA Access for Ls with accommodations. If not, then it would be appropriate to use the checklist. For students with hearing impairments, you will only collect evidence for reading and writing. Here are some of the procedures to follow with the Virginia checklist. Make sure demographic information should be completed. Include the student's full legal name, not the nickname, the STI number, it's typically 10 digits and starts with 101, and the FCPS student ID number. Only one checklist level should be submitted per student. Submit the checklist level with all boxes marked yes or the lowest level checklist. Here are the options for the annual ELP assessment in grades 1 through 12. They include the Virginia checklist for students in grades K through 12 with hearing and visual impairments, WIDA alternate access for ELS, WIDA access for ELS paper, and WIDA access for ELS online. For the student to take the WIDA alternate access for ELS, the student must meet all three criteria. The student has been classified as an English learner, the student has a significant cognitive disability and is eligible for special education services under IDEA, and the student is accessing an alternate curriculum. Students who are required to be assessed will be loaded in WIDA AMS. The required training for WIDA alternate access is a curriculum outlined in MyPDE. It also includes passing the WIDA alternate access for ELS quiz on the WIDA Consortium website. Typically, the WIDA Access for ELS paper version is administered to some interagency students, homebound and home-based students, students with a documented need for this format in their IEP or 504 plan or a medical reason, students who require large print, who have seizure disorders, who are qualified students with hearing impairments who use amplification devices that may interfere with online test headsets. Also, those students who transfer to FCPS from another Virginia public school district who have begun a paper-pencil version of the test. All schools who will be administering a paper version of the WIDA Access for ELS must have the school test coordinator, assessment coach, or test examiner who will be administering the listening, reading, and writing complete the curriculum outlined in MyPDE for the WIDA alternate access and complete the administration quiz on the WIDA Consortium webpage. For those test examiners that will be administering the speaking domain, you must complete the online training as well as the speaking quiz, grades 1 through 5, and/or the speaking quiz for students in grades 6 through 12 on the WIDA Consortium webpage. All STCs and assessment coaches and examiners must be trained prior to administering the assessment. On December 2nd, if you do not have a WIDA Secure Portal account, you should receive an email from the WIDA Consortium to set up your account where you can then complete the quiz examinations under each assessment. Again, all trainings must be completed by January 4th or when testing begins at your school.
Listed on this slide are this year's dates for testing. All testing must be completed during this time frame for Access for ELS, both paper and online, Kindergarten WIDA Access, WIDA Alternate Access, as well as the Virginia ELP checklists.
We thank you for watching this overview for the WIDA Access for ELS assessment. If you should have any questions, please contact the Office of Assessment Reporting at OAR_policyadmin@fcps.edu or ESOL Posting at esolposting@fcps.edu.